neighborhood Spider-Man.
Jake, just like Tom Hardy and the sym-BEE-ote, we are the Watching Comics podcast.
Yes, we are. We live in a symbiotic relationship.
Symbiotic or symbiotic?
You know, growing up, we just got done literally seconds ago with me saying, I can't go into this, and now I'm going to. You beat me so well. Growing up, I always said, I can't even get it right now. They've done it. Sym-BEE-ote, I think, is how I said it growing up. And like I've always said when I read it in my head, it's sym-BEE-ote. But what they call it on the movie was sym-BE-ote, right?
I believe the movie was sym-BEE-ote.
Yeah.
But I have read a couple of different things online that I'm not sure if they're credible or not, that is wrong and that is supposed to be sym-BEE-ote.
Yeah.
Sym-BEE-ote. Or sym-BEE-ote, as the Owens would say.
Yeah.
You know what? I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, what the actual science word is, like symbiosis or something. And there's a real word.
Hardy called it a parasite for the whole 2-hour movie. So there's that.
That's true. But that seemed to be kind of like a word that wasn't welcome there, you know? And so we want to be inclusive on this show. We don't want to take sides on anything, but we definitely want all to feel welcome here. So to our population from outer space, we say, we'll call you symbiotes if that's what you prefer. Symbiote Americans.
Yeah, please correct us on the Twitters if we're wrong about that, because we don't want to use the wrong label. But for now, for the sake of getting through the rest of this episode, we'll go with either symbiote, sym-BEE-ote, or sym-BEE-ote, or one of the variations of the word. That's just kind of where we're at.
The Venom suit.
The Venom suit. So naturally, that brings me to the next topic that we want to discuss. We are here to talk to you about
Venom.
It's here. It's finally here. Way back in April, Jake, we dished on the first trailer that came out, and we talked about the things that we liked, things that we were worried about, and ultimately came to the fact that it would get our money probably on opening night, which it did. And no matter how excited we got, we would still be a little bit apprehensive because Sony Pictures was driving the ship.
Yeah. And, oh man, I don't know how deep we want to go this early. I guess we got to leave a little something for the people to hang on to the rest of the podcast for. But I think largely a lot of our hopes and fears both played out.
It was a little bit of everything, but instead of laughing and crying, it was both my hopes and both my fears.
Yeah.
I tweeted this not long after the movie. I believe I said something to the effect of, wow, that was a lot of something. Like I ended up seeing this movie actually, and in the front row of the screening that I went to were a bunch of guys that I knew, college age students that I knew. And so, of course, as soon as the movie's done, they popped around and were like, dude, what do you think? And I was like, oh my gosh, it was like, we just got done watching a lot, and everything that's about to come out of my mouth right now is completely initial. And, but it was a lot. It was just a lot, right?
Yeah, it was, I don't know. It felt like I had 4 or 5 different reactions to it all at once, and some of them good, some of them bad. I think overall, I mean, I guess, do we want to do like a big initial impression and then get into the nitty gritty? Do we want to reverse that? How do you want to break this down?
Okay, we're clearly, Jake and I were 100% prepared for this episode, so here we go.
We want to show you how the sausage gets made, folks, okay?
Let me review the dozen pages of legal pad notes that I took here that I'm prepared with. Flip, 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 flip. Thumb,
Talk to our
thumb, thumb, thumb.
Staff.
Boom, 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 boom. Here we go. Bullet point number 22B. Let's go ahead and give an initial reaction, and then we can break it down.
Okay, that's kind of... So, I mean, I guess my initial thought overall, after having a couple of nights to grab hold of all these thoughts and wrangle them, form kind of a cohesive idea in my head. I think that I felt like this movie was better than I worried it could be, but not nearly as good as I'd hoped it would be. It was very visually appealing. I think that's probably as far as I'm willing to go at the moment, though.
Or like the largest superlative you can give it.
Yeah, like visually appealing is really its main strength. And we talked about this in what was exciting us with the trailer. And I think what really prompted us to do a whole episode on the trailer back in April was that they got the look of Venom right, which is something that everyone was really hoping for following Spider-Man 3. And so I think that visual, that feel to it, the aesthetic to it, all played out the way I hoped it would, and that's probably the best thing I can say about it. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I can't disagree with that. I mean, if you were to ask me, like, what was the strongest single aspect of the film, easily the visuals. That was by leaps and bounds the easiest one to say. This was great, it was entertaining, and it lived up to expectations, and it's harder for me to poke holes into it. So yeah, the visuals are definitely the winner of the film. At the end of the day, I can say that I was entertained, but I didn't love it as much as I could have, and I left maybe a little more frustrated than I thought I would be, because I saw the makings of something that could have been remarkable. Like I went into it being fully prepared to say, wow, that was slightly better than mediocre, and not be disappointed by it. And now I feel like, after seeing it and having a couple of nights to weigh on it, I feel like I was entertained. It was a slightly better than mediocre movie, but I am actually upset by it because it had moments where it really could have leaned into certain things that made it a lot better. And we'll get into those details a little bit later, but it's like, it just, there was maybe a half dozen times where I was like, oh, almost got it. Almost. Nope, not quite. It was like, it was caught at the warning track, it's just that. And I feel like that's the best way to describe this movie. It was visually enthralling, and it was a caught at the warning track type of movie overall.
Yeah, I like that. That's really well said. I can get behind that 100%. So, for everybody, for my wife who just wants to be able to say she listened, you can tune out now, honey. You know the big point, the big picture.
Mrs. Owens, you've done your job. Well done.
Thank you.
All right. So now that she's logged off, Jake, how do you really feel?
So there are a few points that I really wanted to break down here on this movie, and I think that so I really do want to praise the visuals. I really do want to praise the aesthetic, and I fear giving more real estate tonight about what I didn't like than what I did, because I think that I was real nervous this movie could be a giant stinker. And while that's been the narrative with some people online, I do think I left more entertained than I could have been. So I don't want to just dump on this movie. I do, however, really want to draw attention to what I felt was some really, and I've really wrestled with how to say this, just some bad writing. Some really bad writing.
And we talked about this back in April. Remember when you said, we broke down like things we're excited about and things we're not excited about. And I talked about how the writing was just, at least in the small trailer that we had, the writing was so on the nose and so juvenilely. I'm going to describe everything this way because we're just going to assume that everyone is 5 years old that's watching this type of thing, that it passed the comical stage and went to the stage of like, really? This was approved dialogue?
Well, and it's like, in the first, like exposition has its place. I'm not anti-exposition. It's just that, like, in the first, I want to say 10 minutes, we got such a giant dump of expository information about who Eddie Brock is, what's going on in his life, how he got here, where he's headed, and like, it wasn't. It was all very informative, and it all informed the movie to come. So as far as just did it accomplish its goal, sure, I can't criticize that. But there's also a lot to be said for subtlety. And I know Venom is not a subtle character, And I didn't go in here expecting this thing to be one of the shining, like I didn't come looking for the Dark Knight. I didn't come in here thinking that I was going to get some sort of testament to the power of film that just happens to wear superhero guys. That's not what I came looking for. But at the same time, there is something to be said for a well-crafted story and well-crafted dialogue. You can be really expository in how you write your first few scenes, your first act of your film, without beating me over the head with it. And you can do it in a way that slips it in where, 15 minutes later, I'm like, oh yeah, that was a lot of exposition. But I'm in the moment being taken out of it by Eddie laying in bed with his fiance and like, yes, and I am exactly this tall and I weigh this much and I once had a job here, but now I have a job here and this is my mission in life and this is my main motivation. And that will probably change over the next 2 hours. But right now, this is where I'm at. So let's go for a ride together. And it really just took me out of the moment to get what was basically a previously on Venom dump right there in the first few minutes. Am I off base there? Am I on to something? Where are you at with it?
No, 100%. Now, I think there is going to be an underlying theme. One of the big elephants in the room that has to be addressed is the movie hadn't even reached its official release date on the 5th, and Tom Hardy had already gone public saying the best 30 to 40 minutes of the movie were cut.
Yeah.
So there's animosity even on a small level going into this movie. So this movie clocked in at just under 2 hours, which is pretty short considering where most mainstream superhero movies and especially origin story movies have been in the last 7 years. That's relatively brisk. So I would say I don't know which portion of the movie was cut 30 to 40 minutes, if it was towards the beginning, towards the middle, towards the end, or a little bit of fat from all three of the acts, something like that. But I will meet you there and say that the expository details felt rushed and not – they just weren't handled professionally. They were handled they just tried too hard to spoon feed it instead of just infusing it casually. And that always just bothers me a little bit, just as someone who, I have a master's degree in story structure and someone who makes money in writing stories. That's like a big part of what I do. That always bothers me. But I think that's indicative of a larger issue with the whole movie. And this is one reason where I felt like there were a lot of dots to be connected to the Amazing Spider-Man movies, which is the editing was just off. And one of the guys I actually sat near at the movie is a college student I mentioned earlier before, is actually a freelance cinematographer and does film projects, and that's how he makes his money, does really good work, and he's studying that and everything, and he's just a really talented individual. And we were kind of unpacking that the whole time. It was like the editing was, you could tell that they were trying really hard to make it look like it was shot like a comic book movie, but they were making such sloppy mistakes as far as how sharply they were cutting things, or sometimes the angles just weren't executed quickly, or they were switching camera angles way too quickly. And those things were just jarring for not the right reasons. And just as a general rule, they probably could have taken every sharp edit and extended it by a half a second. And they could have cut out about probably 40% of the camera switches that they would have in a one-on-one conversation type of scene, and it would have been exponentially better. But I feel like that editing is completely indicative to the story structure, where things were just jumping around quite a bit, and it was really quick. It was really brisk. It didn't necessarily make sense. The passage of time wasn't really logical, and you were just kind of bouncing around in the ether here. And clearly it was intentional, but I'm not sure what the finished product was the intention, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's really good, because that puts me more. I like getting that technical end of it from someone who understands it better than me, because it crystallizes some of my thoughts on it. Can I give a spoiler alert and jump ahead on one other issue I had with the writing?
100% spoilers. So if you've not seen it and you don't want it to be ruined for you, take these 3 seconds to push pause right now.
Yeah, and so thank you for pausing, and I'm assuming we've time jumped in your back having seen the film now. I hope it was well. I'm doing well. It was a good few days for me.
I won the lottery in that time. It's been pretty great.
Yeah, it was awesome. So towards the end of the film, we have, like, at the beginning of the film, we have this conflict playing out between Eddie and Venom as they try to share Eddie's body, as Venom is speaking in his head and just wants to eat people and do these bad things. And you get towards the end of the film, it's revealed, oh, it's been eating your insides and it's been killing your organs to survive. And so Eddie gets rid of it and all this stuff. And then all of a sudden they come back together and Venom is like, let's go save the world from my entire race. And let's me betray my very species to save humans that 30 minutes ago I really wanted to eat. And it's this very, like, I had to text Mitch because I typically try not to do a lot of communication between the two of us about the topic so that we can get that. I think part of the fun of recording is to get that instant reaction, right? Like get it on air. And, but I actually had to text you and say, hey, it was late night and I had just finished a long week. Did I fall asleep and miss something key? Because I legitimately go ahead.
Here's the actual text transcription. I'm totally serious. I was really tired. Did I fall asleep and miss a key character development moment where the symbiote got a reason to turn good?
And that's exactly it. Like, because I sat there and I looked around me and I was like, I don't think I fell asleep. I'm positive I didn't fall asleep, but I have said that before as I looked outside at the setting sun after just taking a long blink, you know? And so I thought it's reasonable to say maybe I closed my eyes for a second thinking it was a second, and then when I opened them again, I missed a part where like the symbiote was confronted with something or he made a major character shift, because it was just all of a sudden they're like, let's go save the world. Like he even says that to the symbiote, and it's just, I don't know. And there's this, I understand what I came into the theater for. I understand, like I said, that this was never going to be the Dark Knight. And in a lot of ways, that kind of thing is somewhat true to the character. Because as we discussed in April, Venom as a character has always been far more style than substance. But you don't, like, you can't just make a character suddenly change their entire motivation because it fits the thing you're trying to do. Like, this is, I don't know, this is really lazy writing. And I don't know.
Yeah, the biggest thing is they didn't have any organic moments. They didn't earn any of the moments like that. Clearly there was supposed to be, we, the audience member, were supposed to have the experience of, one, we get a little bit comfortable with the symbiote, both out of humor and out of comfort and kind of emotional connection there. The turn is supposed to make sense. And then we're also supposed to feel the struggle that Eddie Brock has of actually enjoying the connection there and having a hard time coming to terms with them being separated for good. I feel like those two things were completely mixed. I get it. Logically, I get it. Eddie Brock feels more connected and feels more than just a love for power, but feels more of a completely evolved specimen when he's connected to Venom. I felt like those moments weren't there. So then when that moment happened of like, oh, now the symbiote's gone and he feels kind of sad, but I'm like, but does he? And am I supposed to feel that sad too? And when they're back together, I didn't really feel too much resolution because I just didn't feel like it was really built up very much. And so those were that, and the fact that the actual climax of the final throwdown was super, super fast. And it was just kind of like, oh, I guess that's done then. Like those were my two biggest complaints, just because I was like, man, there was so much room for it to be a little bit better and to get me there. But again, the action sequences were shot really well. Yeah. And overall, the visuals and the actual visual palette, the tone of the movie visually and color-wise, I thought was really, really strong. But they were painting with really broad strokes. And in a lot of ways in comic book lore, that can be permitted, but also in a lot of ways, when you're doing a movie, you still have to check certain boxes and certain components of the story still have to be there. And I'd read a couple of pieces that the ringer.com had put out about this Venom movie before the premiere had dropped. And by the end of it, I realized that this made a whole lot of sense. The big question they kept asking was, no one is doubting that Venom is a great character, one of the most beloved villains in all of comic books, and people are excited to see him on the big screen because stylistically he would look great on the big screen. But as you said, more style over substance. Why in the world was he actually given his own movie? And if the lack of a conventional script, the missing components, the ability to actually show us a character arc that was, believable and natural to follow, and more than just stylistic points and a couple of key plot holes here and there, then yeah, maybe he just doesn't have enough to carry his own movie. But that's a larger question. I don't know. I mean, like you said, I don't want to harp on too much on being negative when I was clearly entertained. And this is in the upper half of comic book movies. Like, I would put it in the middle somewhere. It's certainly not bad, but it could have been better, and they had moments of it. And I think that's just ultimately what I keep coming back to, because I don't know. Can we pivot to the humorous side of things for the movie? Like, I thought when Venom actually entered Eddie and they started interacting, those points of the movie where you actually felt like it was okay to laugh instead of laugh out of nervousness or laugh out of this is so awesomely bad, but laugh because it was genuinely humorous. That was phenomenal. And they didn't lean into it as much as they should have. Like, I felt like, I don't want to say that it should have been Deadpool. It didn't need to be that overt and that crazy, but there was definitely room for them to carry that aura throughout the entire movie instead of just those 3 or 4 scenes where it was really, really sharp. And because of that, because those were clearly the high points to me, then the rest of the movie felt disjointed to a certain degree, because I'm like, okay, Riz Ahmed is a phenomenal actor. And if you look at any of the other movies he's done, you can tell that the dude knows how to bring it and can fill the screen. But he was just really one note and really boring and underdeveloped, probably because of the lack of script or lack of directing. Michelle Williams and Tom Hardy, both great actors, and they're both great performers. They both are Oscar nominated. They both are phenomenal, and they both try really, really hard. They're going to bring the heat. But man, could they have had any less chemistry on screen?
Yes, thank you.
And so the strongest points to me were these brief fleeting moments of dark humor. And I wish that had been sprinkled more organically and evenly throughout the entire movie. So I could have at least said at the end that I had like a consistent note of entertainment throughout the whole thing. And I could say, okay, they clearly wanted to go this route with it, and they did. Instead, I felt like they had 2 conflicting tones the entire time. One of, I'm taking myself so seriously that I'm actually making fun of myself. And then the moments where we're self-deprecating, that's actually humorous and super entertaining, and we're just going to try to make you pick one. I don't know. It just felt a little too disjointed for me. I was talking a long time there, so let me know what you think.
No, I'm right there with you. I thought that the chemistry thought was one of my key points that I had about the movie was just the lack of chemistry between anyone, and except for Tom Hardy and himself. And I thought that a little bit Jenny Slate and Tom Hardy had a little bit of chemistry, but I did not in any way manage to invest myself in the drama between Michelle Williams and Tom Hardy. I was completely unable to view Riz Ahmed as anything but just a very one-note, very, very fill-in-the-blanks kind of villain. And I think that, to me, a lot of this movie, and this is going to tie back to the humor point, a lot of this movie to me feels like it feels like when Sony decided to finally pull the trigger on this thing, they went back into the vault and they found one of those like early 2000s Mad Libs that they would use to write superhero scripts, where you just fill in a new noun and a new verb and you make the exact same thing that we've seen 100 times, and people come see it because it's still a novelty. And I want to propose that with the humor included, and with the stunning visuals, I actually think that if this movie comes out in 2002 to 2005, it's probably our favorite movie we've seen in years. Like, it's probably getting rave reviews and is beloved. And I think that
it's a Silver Age comic.
It is, to go with the theory.
It is to go with the theory, which is coming up really soon. In a few weeks, we're going to dish on this for you all, everybody. But it's classic Silver Age. If this would have come, if instead of Spider-Man 3, if we would have had this, not necessarily connected to the Raimi universe, but just if we had Spider-Man 1 and 2, they stopped. And then, 2 or 3 years later, we had this one. I think it would have been a completely different story. The whole time I just kept thinking, I was like, okay, I get what they're trying to do with this script. And the moments when they nail it are home run worthy. But so much of the movie felt warning track because it was like, oh, okay, so this was uneven, or this was disjointed, or this going back and forth with the cameras needed to be lessened by about 50%. Like all of these different things. It just felt like at the end of the day that it's like they skipped the last round of reviews and edits and revisions for the script. It was like they did draft 1, draft 2, and typically you have 3 or 4 or 5 drafts. And it was like, after draft 2, let's just shoot the thing. And it was like, so it just felt early in the creative process where it's like, okay, cool. We've got like 4 really good ideas, but we don't know how to connect them. So let's just shoot them. And then we'll get some filler stuff to fill it up around it. And then we'll just see what we get. And then they release the movie instead of actually fixing the script. And again, I don't want to harp on it too much because I don't want to make it sound like that this movie sucked, because it didn't suck. And it's by no means in the lower stratosphere of some of the ones that have really burned us badly. But I would be lying if I said that I didn't leave the movie theater thinking it could have been better without much extra effort. And I think that's why my few pieces of constructive criticism about this movie may seem a little bit glaring, because it was like, man, they were just so close. Those couple of moments that didn't do it for me, or those few things that were disconnected, could have been tied together completely differently if they would have added 10 minutes or changed a couple things. Like, it was really, really close. So if it was like a C+ or a B- movie, it was really close to a B+ or an A- movie. It was flirting with that realm.
Yeah, and I think that to go with our comic age analogy, our theory here, some of the best comics that you get these days for me are ones that tap into a more classical style of comic, but then sprinkle some modern touches into it to make it feel both familiar and fresh at the same time. We saw this in Daredevil fairly recently. This very Silver Age feel in the comic, but then it addressed some very serious issues like mental health. I think that kind of approach in a cinematic way could have really worked in Venom without a lot of tweaking, because the visuals are there, the dark humor is there that probably were not they were not on par. Generally speaking, in our Silver Age in the early 2000s, most movies weren't nailing those things. And I think with those updates and maybe just a little bit more attention to not even, I don't need the script to be, I don't want to say better, because I think there's some bad points in it. But I think that with what you're referring to as just a little more professionalism and a little bit more polish to it, to make those errors less glaring, I think there's potentially a very fascinating new approach to comic book movies here that we just kind of missed the mark on with I don't know, I don't want to point the finger at anyone or anything, because I don't know what went into the creative process. I'm not in the room. But yeah, I think some tweaks could have made this a great film instead of just a, hey, that was fun kind of film.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if it was the script or the direction or what, but Michelle Williams is, I think almost universally got to be one of the top 10 best, most talented and versatile working actresses in Hollywood today. Riz Ahmed is more than a character actor. He has the chops to carry scenes, to carry movies, and he is incredibly versatile as well. And I was left wanting more from them because there was such star power there. I almost wish they had lesser known people in those roles, and maybe I wouldn't have been as disappointed with them. And again, I'm not taking pot shots at Michelle and Riz. I just, I feel like this has got to be almost a lot of people probably feel this way after filming that movie is like Michelle is capable of doing more. Riz is capable of doing more. And maybe I just want to say they weren't allowed to. And so that contributed to the feeling of me going like, man, you almost did it. Like, I'm not saying Michelle Williams was a bad casting choice because clearly if you've seen the movie Manchester by the Sea, you can have you can leave a lasting impression and even earn an Oscar nomination and be among the best of the year with only being in 2 scenes of a movie. And so she knows how to do that. It's just both of them, I felt like were just completely wasted opportunities that we could have had so much more from those two. And maybe those 2 pieces could have strengthened it a great deal. But again, like you said, I'm not sure completely where the blame lies, but I'm willing to say it's probably they weren't granted enough real estate to really flourish. But what do you think about the Tom Hardy performance? Let's pivot to that because Tom Hardy is kind of in that Bradley Cooper stage for me where when they get it right, they are among one of the best actors in the game. But when they get it wrong, it's kind of comical, but you can tell that they are trying really hard and taking it really seriously. And it's like across the board in both of their careers, both Bradley Cooper and Tom Hardy, it's like about 50% great performances, 50%, ooh, you swung for the fences and it didn't end well.
I think I'm glad you bring this up because I think that I actually, after that trailer we keep going back to, I was really nervous just because of the one scene, and they actually edited that scene or reshot it or did something, but it was much better in the film. But the one where Jenny Slate is trailing him around the convenience store and he's like, "You suck." And the way he delivers it is just, it feels like, I don't know if anyone else has seen the cinematic masterpiece Troll 2, but it felt like one of the goblins from Troll 2 was speaking in that scene.
We all remember our first time with Troll 2.
I seriously, like, man, I should live tweet that sucker this year for Halloween. I love that movie so much. But so I think that Tom Hardy did a lot with the little bit he was given. I think that there were he was kind of all over the place. You know, there were moments where I thought, what's going on here? You're Tom freaking Hardy. And then there were moments where I was like, wow, this guy is single-handedly carrying this movie, playing 2 characters in one body. That's pretty cool. And I think that I don't know if it's a lack of chemistry. I'm certain that the writing contributed. And I think that maybe there was a different level of enthusiasm in some scenes. There's parts where you can see Tom Hardy really getting into it, really enjoying himself and flexing some different muscles by playing Eddie Brock and Venom. But there's other times, primarily the times where he's just Eddie Brock interacting with other humans, where I just felt like it was a very paint by numbers performance, it wasn't bad. It just wasn't what I came in expecting from Tom Hardy. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I almost wonder if part of the chemistry issues are just the fact that Tom Hardy is notoriously difficult to work with on set.
Yeah.
If you read anything about him, you'll know that he doesn't necessarily learn his lines well, and he's not exactly the best person at sharing energy and sharing screen time. So that could maybe contribute to the lack of chemistry between he and Michelle Williams. And he also hasn't been in very many movies where he's had the opportunity to really convince us that he can engage as a love interest. But I mean, if you just scroll through his IMDb pretty quickly, you can tell right off the bat, at least a third of his performances, you can tell he tried really, if you've seen the movies, he's tried really, really hard in making bold choices with them. But it's just, when you do that, it's high risk, high reward. And about a third of his movies just aren't any good, and his performances aren't that great either. But then the ones that are solid are just absolutely spectacular. And so I think he's just a high risk, high reward kind of guy. As far as Venom is concerned, he definitely handled the duality really well. I mean, 100% handled the duality well. And he carried that movie in that sense. And we can't understate that. That's really difficult to do. And not everybody could have done that. And clearly that is the biggest reason why he was cast, because that's the biggest component of this character, right? He's got to be able to carry the movie as Eddie Brock and Venom simultaneously as they do their crazy anti-hero thing. And those were the strongest bits of the movie when it was Eddie and Venom talking to each other and getting into the action sequences. As far as those parts of the movie are concerned, A+ all across the board. when it comes to him actually sharing intimate moments or one-on-one scenes with people, and he's supposed to be a regular character and not a character that's taking place in a dystopian future or wearing a mask or something that's a little crazy like that, then you can tell he clearly doesn't know what to do. And even though he's a seasoned camera actor, he looks very fidgety and moving way too wide for the frames and those sorts of things and making a lot of rookie mistakes. And it just seems like he's not used to having that kind of freedom of just being a regular guy in a regular scene with another person. And Ruben Fleischer isn't as experienced as a director as someone that, someone like Christopher Nolan or someone else that he's worked with in the past. And so it just seemed like there were times where he was making some pretty rookie mistakes, and it just was a little staggering to me because I'm like, that's Tom freaking Hardy, but maybe he just doesn't have very many opportunities to stand there as a regular guy and just exchange a 2-camera scene with one other person without it being some sort of wacky scenario. And that's got to be a contributing factor as well. But by and far, I don't think he was a bad casting choice. I think he carried the crux of the movie as well as he needed to and did it wonderfully. And I think he did everything that was asked of him, probably. So and most of the time, if there's a casting choice that I'm disappointed in, I can usually come up with a replacement I would have rather seen pretty quickly. I don't want to play that game with that. I think I'm comfortable with Hardy taking this role.
Yeah, I really like him in the role, but I'm really intrigued by your analysis there because you've got me now running through my head. And as I'm glancing at his IMDb here and trying to remember, did he have a role that I absolutely loved where he wasn't blowing up Gotham or watching a man play a fire guitar? And I'm trying to remember, not that those are the only 2 roles I liked him in, but I'm just trying to remember, has he had any roles that weren't those over the top? And you've got me reevaluating Tom Hardy suddenly because I had put him in this upper echelon, but now I'm beginning to consider, is he just in an upper echelon as a genre actor? And maybe not, I don't mean that insultingly. I don't mean that to diminish him or genres. I mostly am just suddenly considering, have I maybe been viewing his strengths wrong? That's really fascinating analysis. You kind of turning my world upside down here.
I'll take it one step further. Here's my theory as someone who has a master's degree in theater and story structure, and as someone who, is actively involved in directing and acting and
your education's so much cooler than mine.
I must say, well, I mean, it's not a pissing contest. It's just me saying I
wrote a paper on conflict resolution an hour ago. If it was a pissing contest, you won. You're like halfway up the tree, man.
I'm just here to say, as someone who is an actor and a director and a story writer and someone who works with actors and is constantly in the process of crafting performances out of other people, as far as cinema is concerned, Tom Hardy's natural giftedness is something that is the hardest to teach, and that is he is great at less is more. He is a student of the hardest kind of acting, which is he can be on screen and he can not have any dialogue, and he can communicate to you exactly what he needs to, a wide range of emotions with just his eyes or the positioning of his face. And he can do it very subtly. And that's one of the reasons why he fills the screen so well, and why he's also able to make such staggering moments stick out in high voltage genre type films because of that dichotomy he brings. And maybe because he shines best either when he's making a bold, erratic choice or has some sort of apparatus on his face, or when he's just doing the less is more approach. And I'm wondering if this was just a bad match of when it's not the action Venom sequences, if it was a bad match of script and actor, because there was, like we talked about the writing before, there was just so much unnecessary writing that they had to spit out, unnecessary exposition, unnecessary explanations of things. There are so many moments where they could have showed and not told. And I'm not sure that his, again, I'm picking apart Tom Hardy, but here we go. I'm not sure that he's quite as A+ in the game of standing there with a whole mouthful of dialogue he needs to deliver. And he would have been better off having it be, a scene that was half as long, give him half as much as dialogue, but he could have given you the same range of emotion, and it probably would have been more organic and more believable had we taken out half the words he had to try to spew out. Because he just looked even, and this is before he even had the symbiote take into his body. All right. He was just unnecessarily fidgety and uncomfortable as he was just spitting out so many convoluted compound sentences. I wonder if they could have freed him up more ironically than if they would have just cut out some of his dialogue and be like, okay, Tom Hardy, you can make people feel things by not really doing much at all, except for, using your face. What if we leaned into that? But instead it was kind of like, all right, you've got to adjust this to this dialogue and you've got to get every single word in. Good luck.
That's really fascinating. Yeah, I'm going to have to go back and rewatch some films of his, and you've got me reevaluating everything, man.
Think about this, right? Because a lot of people said that he was he gets talked about an awful lot in the movie Inception, and he really doesn't speak that much in that movie, and he's really only in about half the movie. And then you think about Dark Knight Rises, and obviously he's got a facial apparatus, and so you've really got to listen to when he speaks, but his character doesn't talk a lot, and the limited that he has is pretty eloquent. But I mean, like, if you think about, he was able to tell a story with his eyes because he had to, but they cast him because he could do it. There are those heartbreaking moments when he's looking at Marion Cotillard's character, and you can just see that there is literally an ocean of emotion and history behind there that is flashing before his character's eyes in that single moment, and you just feel it. And in Mad Max Fury Road, which is arguably one of the best movies made this century, I mean, Charlize Theron carried that movie, but Tom Hardy was phenomenal in that film, and I don't think said more than 24 words the entire time. But you knew exactly what he was feeling when he was feeling it, and it was incredibly striking to have those close-ups on his face communicating those things to you without any dialogue in the midst of the fury that was going on all around him. That is an intentional choice, and it speaks to his natural giftedness. And Dunkirk, of course, like Dunkirk, you couldn't even hardly understand any of his language. He was just flying with a mask over his face. But I mean, the dude carried the scenes that he was in. I feel like less is more is where the guy eats, and he just had a mouthful of alphabet soup that he had to spit out in every scene of Venom, and it was just tough for them to balance that out.
And that's interesting because this didn't need to be a character with a ton of dialogue either. I mean, there could have been a lot more of the internal monologue that he was really nailing. And so that's really fascinating. Maybe these are some notes for the sequel. I don't know.
Well, yeah. Well, I know that Sony's listening. They're big fans of ours. I know they're taking notes.
There's two more things I really was hoping we could touch on tonight. And the first one is not as much fun, but I think it's fascinating. And that is the apparent, although the jury is still out, disconnect between critics and audiences on this film specifically. But we're seeing this increasingly with the superhero genre. And I think that we saw this a lot with the Snyder DC films. There was this really, regardless of how, I mean, I don't know. I just think there's this really vocal fan base that really enjoyed those films enough to make, they made a lot of money. And yet had this.
There is nothing like the DCEU Twitter. Oh my gosh.
Oh man, it's simultaneously touching and absolutely revolting all at once. Cause it's like the level of passion, if we could, oh man.
If those people feel like they have been scorned, holy crap, will they come at you with their torches and pitchforks? Good God.
I feel like if we could mobilize that force to, figuring out a solution for Israel and Palestine, we could do some good in the world. Holy cow.
110%. And I'm saying this as someone that's in the DCEU camp. Like, I'm right there with you, man. But yeah, I mean, you don't have to Google very hard to see that critics panned Venom a great deal. It got completely shellacked, but it didn't matter for its opening box office numbers, and it clearly doesn't matter for its fan approval rating. It's currently sitting at 7.1 stars on IMDb, which is pretty high considering that it's like at 20 something on Rotten Tomatoes by the critics.
And so here's what really got me thinking about this. And this is where I think maybe some nuance can be provided by a Twitter account that I follow at Superhero Poll had a really interesting poll, but that poll contained a really fascinating fact. And that is CinemaScore, which is a service that it tries to rank audience response to films as opposed to critical response. And it gives them a letter grade. CinemaScore is giving Venom a B+, which is the same score held by Justice League, Suicide Squad, The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and probably one of the most reviled films for this podcast, Spider-Man 3. So, I think that's really fascinating because I don't know a lot of people that are out there today defending Spider-Man 3. I think some people have softened their position on Amazing Spider-Man 2, and I think Suicide Squad and Justice League are still being battled out on Twitter. But I say all that to say there is this fascinating disconnect between not just critics and audiences, but between audiences and audiences on these films. And what's your take on that? Do you think that there's like, are there all these competing fan bases? Is there anything approaching a consensus? How much do these scores matter? Is the critical response going to be enough to tank a potential Venom sequel? Or is the fact that the audiences are giving it a B+ and showing up in mass at the theater week 1, is that enough that they're going to go ahead and greenlight the sequel in the near future? What's your take?
That's a great question. I think there are a couple of pieces that are more disconnected than people want to admit. The super passionate diehard people, the people that love DCEU so much that they actually defend Suicide Squad to the death. The people that love the MCU so much and all of the different versions that are outside of it, Fox and Sony and stuff like that, they'll even go see the Fantastic Four movies. You know what I mean? Like the ones that are super committed, these scores don't mean anything because those people are going to go give that movie their money anyway. I think as far as debating between which ones are better, I'm not sure scores matter as much as it just provides Twitter fodder. And as long as your movie is getting mentioned, whether it's bad or it's good, in a lot of ways, you're still a part of the pop culture conversation and setting trends. And there's a massive amount of valuable currency in that, whether it's good or bad. And the fact that Spider-Man 3 doesn't get defended, but it also just doesn't get talked about at all, because I think people were so upset with it and so offended by it for all the wrong reasons that even the trolls recognize that if we talk about it, then it's giving it social credit, and social credit means something. So let's just not mention it at all. And not being mentioned at all is the worst kind of death. So I think as far as the larger question, people like you and me and people that are even more committed than you and I, because I feel like you and I probably rest in the middle. We're more like registered independents than we are Republicans or Democrats in the comic book world. We're going to see these movies anyway. And the people more committed to us with their allegiances are definitely going to go see this movie. Those two camps, the independents and the MCUs and the DCEUs, that's probably enough to get you a couple $100 million. And then the rest of it is hype and box office polling and stuff like that can get some people coming in weeks 3, 4, and 5. Ultimately, to answer your big question, Jake, which is what gets something greenlit? Are we going to move forward? Here's the question that no one really wants to answer truthfully, because it really doesn't, because it almost makes everything that happens in the Twitter world that we both love and both love to make fun of at the same time, it makes it all null and void, which is this. And it's not a big revelation, but here it is, Jake. It's not whether people are passionate about it on Twitter or they're arguing about it or people saying that they want this or anything like that. What actually dictates whether something gets greenlit or not is the amount of money it makes at the box office, period. Especially since most studies have been coming out that said over the last few years with the rise of digital media that DVD and Blu-ray sales have dropped dramatically. And even in the early to mid 2000s, DVD Blu-ray sales would make up almost 50% of the entire gross of a movie that they would hope to bring in. So even if a movie bombed in the box office, it could become a late slow burn hit, become a cult classic, get really hot on the DVD shelf, and still make back all of its money. Well, now that's not happening anymore. So movie companies are losing money on the DVD sales. So the box office is even more valuable than it was before, because that represents about 85 to 90% of what it's going to make now, rather than 55, 60%. So ultimately, allegiances be damned. lines in the sand being drawn, hot takes being told, people trolling on Twitter, the grades on Metacritic and whatnot. Like, those things matter socially, and they matter for the industry of criticism, and they matter for the social credibility that you get. But at the end of the day, box office money is what determines whether something gets greenlit or not. And there could be a huge faction of people that think Venom's the greatest comic book movie ever made, but if it makes less than $100 million, it's not getting a sequel. Every single critic could say that this was one of the worst comic book movies ever made, but if it makes over $250 million in the box office, we're getting a sequel.
I'm not sure that I've ever been so fascinated to just sit and listen while we're recording this, because economics has become a weird interest of mine just as a hobby to read about these things. And the
You're
economics,
a smart individual, and you're going to sit one day.
No, I'm so fascinated by the economics behind this industry, and I think that I think that a lot of what gets interpreted as, I don't know, spectacle film versus art film, or superhero fatigue, or whatever, or Star Wars fatigue. I think all of those conversations, what they really boil down to is they're a surface look at the deeper issue of economics of film and how it's shifted in the last couple of decades, and how Hollywood is really getting its feet back under it after kind of being completely upended in a lot of ways by the digital revolution, by changing habits of moviegoers, almost by Movie Pass. And so I just think that I'm just really fascinated by that. And I think that it's like the hidden world that we don't stop to consider when we're in the theater of what we're going to see, and not just what we're going to see, but what massive, huge amounts of us are going to see, is really dictating a lot more than it used to what's getting made. And it's not necessarily a dollar vote anymore as much as it is $1 million vote. And whatever you can get a massive crowd to is what's signaling Hollywood, we need more of this. And I'm very fascinated by that, and where it's headed. And I don't know, that's really interesting. I do want to shut up though and ask and then shut up. Let me reverse the order on that.
Can I say one more thing that's related to this?
Yes, by all means.
And then, so hold on to your question. Don't forget it. But I have a feeling it's going to be different than what we're talking about. And I wanted to toss in just one more thing. I also feel like, because of the hot take Twitterverse world that we live in, that you and I both freely contribute to. So I'm not saying we're holier than thou. This is just the reality of the situation. This is the pool of which we are swimming. There's more toxic waste in it than we care to admit, and I've contributed to that more than I care to admit there. But I feel like we're almost 20 years into this renaissance of comic book movies, and I'm assuming when we get to the different ages of comic book movies, we're probably going to have 3 ages, and 2 of them are going to be in the 21st century. So we've got a lot of real estate that we've covered. I think it's time that we get a lot more comfortable with the conversation, saying that there are more movies like Venom and Ant-Man and the Wasp than there are Black Panther and Dark Knight. And it's not that we need to lose hope or that we should enjoy the genre any less, but it's just Black Panther, I believe, should be nominated for Best Picture. I thought Wonder Woman should have been nominated for Best Picture 2 years ago. And it's just because those movies are not only incredibly well made and represent some of the best cinematic excellence that you can find in this genre, but they also crossed at the perfect epicenter of critical, commercial, and social influence that matter at an incredibly important time in our lives. And those things converge to make a supernova that is magnanimous and beautiful to behold. But those are the outliers. Wonder Woman, Black Panther, Dark Knight, those movies are the outliers. The rest are these movies that are, B+.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm right there with you. I think that my biggest takeaway, and I say this to kind of, I'm going to be the douchebag here and, sing our own praises. I think that's kind of what we're shooting for here tonight is I think 2 things can be true. And I think that one thing that gets lost in the Twitter sphere, in a world of social media, in a world where you're limited to a certain number of characters, is nuance. And I think that part of why everything is so polarizing, and I'm not even trying to talk politics here. I'm just talking like, just look at the internet and how people feel about movies and comic books, man. I think part of why everybody's always so polarized is because we lost that nuance sometimes. And I think that it is absolutely possible to do what we're trying to do here tonight and say, I enjoyed this movie. I had fun watching it. I don't think there's anything wrong with nitpicking it a bit and asking a little more of it. But that doesn't mean that I'm mistaking it for Citizen Kane or The Godfather. And I think that, but I'm right there with you. I think we can totally enjoy these things for what they are. I think we can enjoy the entertainment factor and say, I'm not saying we go and make this thing Oscar worthy. I am saying maybe a couple of tweaks, it could have been even more fun. Does that? Yeah. So I'm with you.
I think that's fair. 110%. I want people to know that this movie was fun. It was entertaining, and it was almost remarkable. But because it was almost remarkable doesn't make it bad.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like it's too easy to get caught up in, not that anyone's ever pulled a soundbite from us, but I think the soundbite tonight. Yet, stay tuned. If you're listening and you'd like to pull a soundbite, please do. But I think the soundbite tonight could have been me saying, "Oh, the writing is not good." Well, yeah, if you're going to just isolate that, you're going to take away Jake Owens hates Venom. But if you listen to the whole thing, you're going to hear that I had a pretty good time seeing it. I was pleasantly surprised with a lot of it. I really loved getting to see one of my favorite 90s comic book characters up on the screen. And yes, I know he was made in the 80s, but I don't remember much of the 80s. Get off my case. But not you, Mitch, get off my case. The collective, whomever, get off my case.
Yeah, I was being unnecessarily loud there. I apologize.
I think that I just think that two things can be true. We can enjoy it and expect more of it, and that sort of nuance I think would be more welcome in this arena. And I think that it would make these things more enjoyable if we could all understand that you don't have to absolutely hate something and you don't have to have your life completely transformed by a comic book movie. Okay, I'm a guy sitting in a room full of comic books right now, and I'm telling you, these things don't have to change your life every time you pick one up. And you can still love it and still have a good chunk of your personal culture defined by it without having every single thing that happens in it be an outrage or a victory.
Hashtag mic drop.
Yeah, man, I feel good about that soundbite. Take that one and run with it.
Yeah. Take that for data.
I have a last question for you, and I kind of want to just hit on, where do you want to see this go? Assuming that enough butts get in enough seats that this thing gets a sequel, do you want to see a sequel? Do you want to see, again, spoilers if you're still with us and you ignored the first spoiler warning, do you want to see the Woody Harrelson Carnage movie, and do you want to see Tom Holland's Spider-Man get involved in this franchise in any way, or do you want to keep them separate?
Oh my gosh, you just opened a huge can of worms, and we don't have that kind of time.
With like minutes left, I know.
Okay, can I just say, like, Woody Harrelson, phenomenal actor. The dude can do literally anything, but that wig.
Okay, so I'm so psyched at the casting. Okay, again, two things can be true. I'm really jazzed at the idea of Woody Harrelson playing Cletus Cassidy, and I think it's phenomenal awesome casting. I don't know why we need the carrot top wig. I don't understand why he looked like Sideshow Bob from The Simpsons.
It was man, I can't. You hit the nail on the head. I'm like, I couldn't be more excited about a cat. Like, that may be the best casting choice they've made in this Venom universe here so far. He is going to deal, man. This is his prime rib. He's going to do it. But yeah, the hair, I can't.
Carnage is going to break out of jail and go kill Bart Simpson. Like, it's just that I know that it would be a continuity error. I don't even need the scene where he gets his head shaved, guys. Just take the wig off before you start filming Venom 2 or Maximum Carnage or whatever you want to call it. Just take the wig off, Woody.
Hashtag take the wig off, Woody. We're doing it. Okay. So here's the deal. Like, unless Tom Holland's Spider-Man gets like the most amazing Tony Stark approved suit with so many added gadgets that it's not even close to comic book worthy Spider-Man at all, like, I don't think Tom Holland's Spider-Man can even last 2 rounds with Venom. Like the way they did Venom action wise and superpower wise and just grandiosely, just in all of his venomness in this movie, it seems like Tom Hardy doesn't really stand, like his Spider-Man doesn't really stand a chance, right? So,
well, and to a certain extent, that takes it back to the origin of the character, where Venom was meant to be this overwhelming physical threat, that he's immune to the spider sense. He's got an enhanced version of all Spider-Man's powers. Like, he's supposed to be this immense physical threat that the only way Spider-Man could ever get past him is by using his brains. But I'm right there with you. Yeah, I think that they set this up on a different power scale than the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man is necessarily ready for.
And I mean, at least right now, they're clearly making Spider-Man way more Marvel adjacent, whereas Venom is clearly a Sony project. You know what I mean? Like, I get that Spider-Man belongs to Sony, but they've infused Tom Holland in the actual MCU, and Venom's floating out here on his own for now. So as far as sequel is concerned, I mean, until I see what they do with Spider-Man, with Mysterio and everything coming up, I'm amped up for Venom and Carnage. I'm totally amped for that. Give me that. And I'm not really struggling with fatigue, but we don't need cross-pollination yet, you know? And if they set the stage for Carnage, then cool, lean into that. Give me Carnage. I'm pro Carnage, and I am pro Woody Harrelson casting. Give me that. I don't need it to be more complicated than that.
Yeah, as much as the 90s kid in me would really adore a Maximum Carnage adaptation on screen that brought in, you know, Tom Holland, maybe even get Chris Evans to cameo as Captain America. Much as all of that sounds awesome, I have a lot of trouble reconciling the styles of those two universes enough to make a cohesive unit. And I think that Venom has been shown
where it sits right now stylistically. It's like oil and water.
Yeah. And I think the thing is, like, the Venom movie, like we've discussed, there are things that I would change about it. The presence of Spider-Man is surprisingly not one of them. And I had a lot of concern just to myself as a Spider-Man fanatic. I had a lot of concern about, can this character be, not are there stories, but can they be interesting without the hatred of Peter Parker that really pushes Eddie Brock over the edge and causes him to embrace the Venom identity? Can that character be interesting without that? And I think this movie showed that, for its flaws, that was not one of them. It absolutely can be a fascinating character without the Spider-Man connection. So at this point, with Spidey off doing his own thing with the Avengers and banking big time money for Sony through the Marvel deal, I don't see a reason. I just don't see a reason to try and force that fusion. If the tones fit naturally, then maybe it would be a cool crossover to see. At the same time, maybe you tap into a long-standing superhero comic book convention and you do a crossover where you do take two things that don't sound like they would work and you try to figure out if you can make them work. I guess I wouldn't hate it, but I just don't see a reason to, when you've got Venom's got his own thing going, and now you've already set up Woody Harrelson as Carnage, which is awesome. I just don't see a reason to go and do it. You know, if it's not broke.
100%. I think that's the way to go. Just like you said, it's not broke. Just go with the track that you've laid already, and we'll see where it takes you. And that's so the immediate answer is give us Carnage, and then we'll see.
Yeah.
And I mean, if they did something else, they would probably get our money and we would see it anyway. But I would definitely be happy to give my money to a Venom and Carnage movie with Hardy and Harrelson.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing is, while you'd lose a certain element by not having Spider-Man in there, there's no reason you couldn't still do Maximum Carnage without Spider-Man. Now, there is this element to Maximum Carnage of Spider-Man and Venom bickering over Spidey being a no-kill hero and Venom being I eat people character. But you could certainly swap in another character to take that, provide that moral contrast if that's really where they want to go with it story-wise. Or you could just do the Maximum Carnage story and say, screw it, we don't need that part of it. we just want the spectacle here. And again, Venom being style over substance, I don't see a reason why that wouldn't work. So I personally would love to see the Maximum Carnage story where Carnage breaks out of prison, starts his own little Manson family of supervillains is what he does, and just sets them on a killing spree. And I would love to see Venom have to stop that. As cool as it would be to bring Spidey in, I don't need it.
As the token neighborhood Spider-Man IP expert, I think you have every reason to weigh in with what you have, and I have no reason to not trust you.
Well, there we go.
There it is. It's decided. So Venom, and if nothing else, Venom is visually stunning, highly entertaining. The action sequences are phenomenal, and it is worth experiencing on the big screen. So if you haven't seen it yet, go see it on the big screen if you're planning to, because it's one of those few movies where it's going to be better seeing it through that lens than if you just stream it later on down the road. But anyway, yeah, I think we've done it. We've both celebrated and fixed Venom at the same time, as only you and I could do. So there's that.
Yeah, if I'm going to bring some closure to both of my Twitter followers, the cat peeing in my hat was not the worst thing, or was the worst thing that happened that night. Venom did improve my evening.
Mission accomplished. Thank you, Tom Hardy.
Which, can I also just add that cat urine in a Royals hat was the last thing I needed after that baseball season ended? Come on, guys.
But it's also highly symbolic.
It really is. It really captured my mood.
Your cat ghosted you.
Yeah, I'm sad now. Let's end this.
Okay. Well, thanks to the GeekDad Podcast Network, as always, for hosting us and letting us call that place home. It's a wonderful little nook of geekery that we get to live in. Hit us up on Twitter. We are at Watch Comics. That's comics with an X, at Watch Comics Pod. Hit us up. We want to hear your thoughts on the Venom movie and see how much you hated what we had to say, because it's Twitter and that's what it's for. Yeah. Anyway, we will come at you next week with Jake. You want to tell them what we're going to do next week? I'm
so excited. We're talking about Hellboy.
Hellboy. That's all we're saying. Hellboy. It's coming next week. We'll hit you up then.
See you then.
This podcast has been a production of the GeekDad Podcast Network. If you've enjoyed this content, please consider supporting us at patreon.com/geekdad.